talk about the story. I'll talk about my own story, a couple of other stories. Then I'll talk about some insight which I'll draw from the Bhagavad Gita and the yoga traditions. And then I'll talk about practicals. What we can carry with us, what we can take away with us. Okay. So, in my life journey, see, for all of us, if we consider we want some doors to open for us in the journey of our life so that we can go to a bigger and better life. A door could be you get admission in a great college, we get a good job, we have a promising relationship, we get some promotion, some raise, some recognition. So basically we want doors to open in our life. And that's naturally important. At the same time, in the course of our life, on the path of life, there are also trapdoors. And it's very easy to fall into those trapdoors. And if we fall into those trapdoors, then we end up sabotaging ourselves. And these trapdoors broadly fall in two categories. One is emotions and the other is desires. Sometimes our emotions get the better of us and we overreact to small things. Or sometimes because of some trauma from the childhood, from the past, we are not able to handle some pressures and we succumb, we cave in. And so with desires, we may have cravings that become disproportionate and destructive. There could be addictive desires that come up. And both of these can lead us to self-sabotage. And so, we could say that the war within is about closing these doors, closing these trapdoors inside, so that we can focus our energy on opening these doors outside. So there are inner trapdoors that need to be closed and outer doors that need to be opened. So when I came in, you probably noticed that I needed crutches for walking. When I was staying in a small town in India, and my mother took me to get a polio vaccine. The polio vaccine is one of the most reliable vaccines, and polio is almost eliminated from the world now. But at that time, because it was not so developed, so there was power supply outages that happened regularly. And the day before I was taken to that clinic, the previous night there had been a power supply outage. And because of the fridge in which the vaccines had been kept had got heated up. This is called the cold storage problem in vaccine delivery. So due to the increased heat, the germs in the vaccine increased. And neither the attendant nor the physician noticed that. So when I was given the vaccine, instead of preventing polio, it ended up causing polio. Now, I don't remember any of this. I was about 1, I was just learning to take my first steps. And I fell down, I couldn't walk normally thereafter. But my first memory of this is when I was about 2.5 or 3, and a distant relative had come to our home. And she was consoling my mother, saying, "It's so sad, your son got polio." And I remember my mother's voice, very calm, clear, confident. She said, "Whatever he lacks physically, God will provide him intellectually." Now, I don't know why she said that, and she passed away soon after, so I couldn't get to ask her. But somehow that stayed with me. And as I grew up, I noticed that I did have some intellectual abilities. I could read quickly, I could remember well, I could articulate clearly. And that's how I grew in my life. Now when I travel across the world, I'm often invited to speak at forums where people with special needs gather. And some of the after my talk, I also talk with people. And some of the stories are extraordinarily inspiring. The resilience of the human spirit is awe-inspiring at times. At the same time, far more are the stories of resentment, where people are fighting battles that were lost long ago. Somebody was in a car crash and maybe they lost an eye or a limb. The story is terrible, but it's happened. In fighting battles that were lost long ago, we end up lost now. So, this primary emotion, we could say, that sabotages many of us is resentment. Resentment about why things are the way they are and why they are not better. Everybody feels at some time or the other that life is unfair. And when this feeling starts coming upon us, it becomes very difficult to push on. So this is, even if somebody does not have addictive cravings, or a person not into drugs or alcohol or excessive gaming or gambling or whatever, but still this sense of resentment is widely prevalent. And when we talk about the war within, it is about learning how I can keep these trapdoors inside me, which can basically, if we consider resentment, what it makes us feel is sorry. We feel sorry for the past, what happened to us, and by extension, we feel sorry for the present. And when the trapdoor of the desires is present, then we feel not just dissatisfied or discontent, but we feel much more than that, tormented by the desires, and that is both at the present and the future. When will I get this thing? Somebody is a drug addict. For them, they just need their next fix. They can't live without that. So I'll focus more on this aspect of self-sabotage, but the principles apply also for desires. So when I was studying my engineering, at that time I got involved in a social self-welfare organization. Because I developed my intellectual side, I had a lot of faith in the power of knowledge. So I was in the educational wing of that social welfare organization, and we would go to underprivileged areas and offer free tuition classes for the kids over there. And when I was doing that, those kids, we became friends and started talking. And many of them said that they came from dysfunctional families. There was domestic violence, and most of it stemmed from alcohol abuse, especially among the fathers. So seeing that, once I was talking about history, and I was talking about the First World War and Second World War to the kids, and one of the kids after that told me there had been a huge fight in his home, and he was mortally scared and shaken. So I was thinking that, am I really helping them by talking about when this war happened and why that war happened, when there seems to be a war happening in their own homes? What could we do more to help? So I talked with the leaders of social welfare organization, and then we decided to diversify into offering some support for de-addiction. We got some specialists to come and talk, and then we also learned some principles, we inspired in. And it was a small, what in India we call a slum, a small area like a ghetto, and everybody over there resolved to give up alcohol. And we were very inspired by that. And then I had my semester break, I went home, and when I came back, I found out to my dismay that not only the fathers or the parents, even the kids had started drinking. So in the 2 months break that I had, there had been a local municipality election, and one of the candidates, in order to woo the voters, had brought truckloads of free liquor for everyone. And that's when it struck me that there is this something inside them that was sabotaging them and destroying them. And if I really wanted to help anyone, I had to actually learn about what goes on in the inner world and what can I do to help that. And it's not that I was a saint. I had a bit of a short temper. I never physically abusive, but I used to get angry and lash out at people verbally. And having a bad temper is a problem. But since my childhood, I loved language. I loved English. One of my hobbies was picking up a dictionary and memorizing words. So I soon discovered that a bad temper and a good vocabulary is a deadly combination. Most people, when they get angry, they become incoherent. Okay, just lash out, and we understand they are angry, but we just tune off. This person has lost the plot. What they are speaking doesn't make any sense. But if somebody is articulate, then they can be really sarcastic, scathing, biting. On the internet there are videos of people getting roasted. Now, we may laugh at somebody getting roasted, but the person who gets roasted is really miserable at that time. So, when one time it happened, I just flared up at someone. That person was very close to me, and I hurt a lifelong friend from childhood. And I felt I have to do something. So that same thing, that there is this trapdoor inside me which was sabotaging me. Felt I had to get a handle on this. So that's when I started reading more about, I was always an avid reader, I started reading more about the inner world, about psychology, philosophy, spirituality. And that's when I came to the Bhagavad Gita. And in the Bhagavad Gita, I found a very interesting model of the self. This model of the self is that we are three-level beings. There is our physical side with which we normally identify, that's our body. Then inside us there is the mind, and beyond that there is the soul. So all these three together comprise the self. And these three could be compared. The body is like a hardware in a computer system, the mind is like the software, and the soul is the user. So when we say there is a war inside us, so that war inside us is that there is a part of us which wants to walk through these bigger doors and open those doors. But there is some force which is pulling us down the trap door. And that is the war inside. So what is this war inside? We could say that inside the mind, there are various kind of impressions. So I could put it that if we consider the mind, there are some impressions in the mind which are positive and some impressions in the mind which are negative. And these impressions, the impressions in the mind, they are like a program, like a software program. And these impressions, they in Sanskrit can be called as samskar. Now the word samskar has a positive connotation where it refers to the good values that are passed on by parents to children, say for example. But samskar also refers to the impressions inside us, which can refer to the wounds inside us. So we could write in samskar in English as some scar, that we all have some scars inside us. And what happens when there is a scar inside us? What I found very helpful, very empowering about this particular three-level model of the self is that it helps us understand that the mind and the emotions and the desires that arise from them, they are real. The mind is a real thing inside us. And at the same time, the mind is different from our core. So one of my best-selling books is You Are Not Your Mind. You are better. So the idea is that this model helps us by understanding this three-level model of the self, that if, say, somebody has some emotion regulation difficulty, why does that happen? That's because their mind is wounded. So just as when the body is wounded, we tend to overreact. Once I was giving a talk in auditorium in America, and the organizer wanted to convey some urgent message to me about something. So he climbed back on the stage and he came behind and he tapped me on the shoulder. And he tapped me, it was a gentle tap, but I almost screamed. I had to control myself. He said, I'm sorry, what happened? He said, I had recently fallen on the shoulder and I have a sprain over here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I said, I didn't know that. So that's okay, I know that you don't know that. My point is that whenever there is any wound, the characteristic of a wound is that there is a small stimulus and a huge reaction. A small touch and there can be almost a scream of pain. And what applies to the body also applies to the mind. So if somebody overreacts, say somebody might have been bitten by a dog in their childhood, and then they see a dog. Now even if the dog is a cute, cuddly little poodle, but still they'll feel alarmed by that. Why? Because that small stimulus triggers a strong reaction based on the past impression, the past memory that is there. So the robustness of this model is that it acknowledges the inner wounds inside us, that they are real and they will weaken us. But we are not those wounds. We are different from those wounds. It's like I have a physical handicap that limits me in some ways. But that it limits me, it does not define me. And that difference is very important. Many times when there is this war inside us, we may feel, say, insecure. We may feel insecure. Am I good enough? Many people have this imposter syndrome. That I've got into this college, I'm in this relationship, I'm in this club, I'm doing this thing, but maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm just putting on a show and one day it will all come crumpling down. So that sense of insecurity that comes, that is quite possibly because maybe while we were growing up, we were unfairly compared with a sibling or a neighborhood kid. Why are you not like that person? Why can't you be like this? Why don't you do this? Now those may create some impressions inside us. And those impressions lead us to have those kind of feelings of insecurity. So essentially what happens, if I go back over here, in the mind, information comes from outside. And one possibility that information just gets transmitted unaffected. So, say if you hear somebody speaking in the background in a language that you don't understand, and you might just, okay, that's some sound, it passes by, it doesn't really affect you much. But if somebody is speaking in a language that you understand and they are mocking you, they are deriding you, they are using bad names for you, then what happens? That same impression comes inside us, but it triggers something inside us. And when it gets triggered, then that stimulus doesn't stay small. It expands and consumes our entire consciousness. So when that happens, that's when we get overpowered. So another way to put it that based on the information that is coming into our mind, in our mind, there are many small windows open. It's like if you go to a high security building, then they have a control room or security center room, and there maybe the CCTV camera is there with all the key strategic points being monitored on a big screen, and the security head sits over there and watches. And if they see any suspicious looking character, at that time immediately it clicks on that, and then that window opens it. So basically, if we as souls are over here and there are multiple inputs coming into our mind, now which window gets maximized and which window gets minimized accordingly? So from here, say if this is something important, this particular window, so right now you're sitting and hearing and you're interested in this talk, then what will happen is that particular window will get maximized and all the other windows will become minimized. And this is something which is good. But if there is something unimportant, but still it is painful, it is agitating, Maybe somebody spoke some hurtful words to you during the day today. And if that memory gets triggered, then what happens is all the other windows, they stay small, and say this particular window becomes big. And then the words that that person has spoken keep replaying inside us. How could this person speak like this? And then we may go into revenge fantasies. Oh, I will teach this person a lesson. They insulted me like this at this forum, this place, in front of these people. I'll do this to them. Or if not into revenge fantasy, we might go into a pity party, where we start feeling sorry for also nobody respects me, nobody cares for me, nobody values me, nobody loves me. If the mind goes into a hyperdrive, may say, not only does nobody respect me now, nobody will ever respect me in the future also. I'll always be an object of pity and mockery for everyone. And then we feel completely overwhelmed by that. We can become demoralized, we can become depressed. And if an unwanted window, if a negative window not only opens up in the mind, but that is the default window that stays open constantly, then what happens? If this negative window, it is open, that means the trapdoor is opening inside us. If it opens slightly, we feel discouraged. But from discover, why do people think like this about me? Why are people so mean? Why do people speak like this? It's discouraged. But from there, we can go down to being depressed, where it can become, is there any point in, will things ever change? The depression, the main characteristic of it is lack of hope, lack of desire. And from there, we can become destructive. We can become destructive towards others. We can become destructive towards ourselves. People can try to escape through taking substances, escape by just watching TV, or we just try to end it all tragically by ending our life itself. So what happens in our mind, that which window is being opened and how long is it being opened, that is essentially the key that we need to deal with. See, everybody will face loss in life. Loss means we might lose an opportunity to do well in an exam, we might lose an opportunity to get some internship, we might lose a relationship, we might lose the respect or reputation in a particular place. Everybody will face loss. And that now when this loss happens, depending on which window opens and for how long. That loss can be processed in three broad different ways. I have lost. This is what in the Gita's language is called sattva. Sattva is associated with truth. Yes, this happened. It's bad, but I have lost. It's one event in life. It's a loss of opportunity. Far more damaging would be, I am lost. This is rajas. It's said when we are too invested in a particular thing. If somebody is invested maybe 3, 4, 5 years in a relationship, and suddenly there's a breakup. They use the word breakup, but there's hardly any up in it. It's mostly breakdown that happens, unfortunately. So if you're too invested, you say, I'm lost. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. So now this is much more difficult. It's not just a loss of opportunity, it's a loss of direction. I am a loser. Not only am I lost, but I am a loser. Now, if we were in a relationship with somebody who we thought was a loser, we wouldn't want to be dragged down by that person. We would probably want to end the relationship as quickly as possible with them. But if we think of ourselves as losers, then what are we going to do? Can we break up with ourselves? We can't, but maybe we can. When people try to end their lives, that's what they're trying to break up with themselves in some way. So it's a harsh reality, but this whole idea of which window is opened and how long, it's not just a poetic metaphor, or it's not just some cute analogy. It is actually a model for explaining the inner world, which can have real world consequences for us. So the war within is essentially determining which windows are getting popped up inside me. Are they the windows that work for me, or are they the windows that work against me? And that will be the last part. So this was the, anyone remember the acronym that I was discussing? I started with a sip of wisdom, SIP. So I talked about story, I talked about insight. Now lastly, what is pre? Anyone remembers? Practicals. Thank you. So I'll just talk about a couple of practicals. So what do we do? The war within is that we want to ensure that the windows that open are the windows that work for us, not against us. So when any particular window opens, if this is my mind, then when any particular window is there, that window opens based on two things. There is the outer perception. From outside, what do we see? What do we hear? And then there is the inner recollection which comes from the impression. The inner impression which, say somebody speaks something hurtful to us, and maybe that reminds us of somebody in our childhood who bullied us or who really hurt us terribly. And then it might, what the person spoke right now might not be a very hurtful word, but maybe one word that they used was similar to what somebody who was very mean to us in our childhood was there. And that one word triggers us. So when this particular window just becomes large, it just fills us up. This window becomes large. It could be because of, sometimes it is 50% perception, 50% impression. Sometimes it could be 95% perception, 5% impression. That means somebody is really mean to us, and then finally we get triggered inside. Sometimes it could be 95% perception, and it could be 95% impression and 5% perception. Like I said, a small, gentle little dog is there, and we feel alarmed by that dog. Or the elevator, maybe we are trapped in some closed place in our childhood. We see an elevator and I can't get inside this. So we are doing well in our studies, but say somebody who we consider equal does better than us in our exams. And then that's not the end of the world in any way. But the fact that they did better than us, that just shakes us up. We might become very affected by that. So broadly, that the perceptions and the impressions that shape which windows open inside us. So the inner war, how do we fight the inner war so that the windows that are helpful for us open and not the windows that are harmful for us? So for this, there are essentially three things that are very important. That the inner, ensuring that the windows that open inside us are what we want to be opened. So I'll use an acronym over here, AIR. We need some breathing space. Sometimes if an unwanted window opens up, we feel suffocated from within. We can feel completely overwhelmed. So the first is awareness. That in general, we can start with trying to become aware of our inner world. So we are often partly aware of what we are doing, whom we are talking with, whether we are studying, we are hearing, but regularly taking little breaks, maybe once in a few hours, take a few deep breaths, and try. We are always thinking, but we rarely think about what we are thinking about. So okay, just become a little more aware of our thoughts. Like I talked about the soul and the mind. If the soul and the mind are very close to each other, then it becomes very difficult to separate ourselves from our thoughts. But if we can create a bit of a distance, the soul is here and the mind is here, then we can evaluate what emotion is coming over there. But before that, just become aware. Now, just by a little self-observation, we might notice something about ourselves. Sometimes, if you know somebody closely, we all can notice some personality traits about them. Say if somebody is lying, maybe their voice becomes a little squeaky. Or somebody is angry, maybe, the tip of their nose becomes a little reddish, or somebody is a little frustrated, maybe they start tapping. We all it's easier to notice such personality traits about others when they are getting triggered by something. But if we can observe ourselves, that what are the indications that an unwanted window is opening within us? That's awareness. It could be that when we are talking with someone, suddenly our voice starts getting raised, or it may be that our fist gets clenched, maybe our breath starts getting faster. So see, we want to be aware inwards, but quite often it's very difficult to suddenly become aware of our thoughts. So what I'm saying, awareness is, there is inner awareness in terms of our thoughts. What kind of thoughts, emotions, basically what windows are opening within me. But it's not that easy to think about that, to notice that. But we could start with the outer it. We could look at some gestures, some sensations, that our jaw gets very tightly clenched, a brow gets furrowed. So basically, just to start becoming a bit more aware of when some unwanted windows are opening within us. And that can be a very powerful step to diffuse the problem before it becomes aggravated. The second point is intelligence. Intelligence means, in this context, see, intelligence it has many different meanings, but I'm defining intelligence in very simple means over here. Intelligence is basically to bring facts in dialogue with claims. So facts versus claims. Like, sometimes some politicians may make some bombastic claims about what they've achieved, or then there are fact checkers. Is this really true? So our mind may make a claim. If you enter into an elevator, you'll get trapped and nobody will know, and you will starve and you will die over there. That's a claim. Or say we go for some social event, we go for some party, we go for some ceremony, and we greet someone and that person doesn't even notice us. And mind says, just see, this person doesn't respect you. And this person doesn't respect you, nobody respects you actually. Everybody is so mean over here. Everybody will neglect you and mock you, and you'll feel sorry for yours, and you'll be humiliated over here. So when a particular stimulus triggers a particular picture inside, a particular window gets popped up, that's a particular claim being made over there. So intelligence means to evaluate the claims by comparing with these facts. Is this real? Is this what actually happens? Is this what is likely to happen, or am I just blowing this up? And this, if we study wisdom texts like the Bhagavad Gita, our intelligence can actually be much more sharpened. The mind's claims versus the actual facts. How do we bring them into not just a dialogue, we bring them in face to face with each other. And developing this intelligence, one more very helpful thing is to have some good friends. Especially if you have some close friends who you can trust, even one friend you can have. Our mind is telling us a particular story, this is how this is. But if you have a close friend with whom we can talk, and then they tell, maybe that is not the only way to look at this. There are other ways to look at this also. So good association is very important. That also nourishes our intelligence. And the third is, third is reformation. That reformation means, I'm not using it in a moral sense over here, I'm using it in reforming the impressions inside us. That the impressions inside us are there in a particular way. And as long as those impressions are there, certain pop-ups will keep coming. So for those impressions to be changed, what is required is that new impressions be formed. And this is where spiritual practices can be extremely helpful. So I am based in Mumbai. There is a small thing in Mumbai. Have any of you heard of this? So suppose somebody has visited a website called Bollywood.com on their phone. Maybe they have visited 50 times. And they come and hear talk like this on the Bhagavad Gita. And they be a little interested. Okay, I want to know more about it. So they open their browser and they want to know what is Bhagavad Gita. So they type Bhagavad Gita, they type B. And what will happen? Bollywood will come as autocomplete. But they didn't want to go there, but it will come as autocomplete. Why? Because that's what is stored in the browser history. So now that browser history, whatever is there, that will come as autocomplete. Like that, our impressions are there. Whatever past impressions are there. So whenever we feel a little stressed, when you feel a little depressed, maybe the autocomplete that comes from the auto suggestion that comes from inside is, let's watch some Netflix, let's go surf on social media, let's eat something, maybe for some people, maybe let's take some drugs, or let's drink some liquor, whatever. So there is some autocomplete that comes for us. Now the way to change the browser history, with respect to the phone, we could just delete the browser history, we can format the device, but there is no deleting or formatting for the mind. Now what we need to do is, say Bhagavad Gita. You type it all the 12 letters we type, and then that gets logged into our browser history. Next time we type B, then Bollywood may still come, but Bhagavad Gita will also come as one of the autocompletes. And if we keep visiting Bhagavad Gita repeatedly, then what will happen? That will start coming as the first autocomplete. So this is where the spiritual practices often involve repetition. Say for example, in our tradition we chant mantras, we chant especially the Hare Krishna mantra. So when we chant the Hare Krishna mantra, the point of repeating the mantra is that when we repeat something, just like when you repeatedly visit a particular website, that gets logged into your browser history, and that comes as autocomplete. So when we repeatedly choose a healthier response, so when we feel agitated, instead of getting angry, take a few deep breaths, okay, chant a few mantras. When we do that, we'll find that a healthier response will gradually start becoming easier and easier for us. And when we win the inner war, we start winning the inner war when the healthy impressions that are there inside us, okay, this person irritated me, the unhealthy pop-up is, yell back at that person. The healthier response is, okay, just calm down, take a few deep breaths and relax, chant a few mantras, just get a handle on yourself. And what will happen? Slowly that healthier response will become the natural response. And that's how we'll start winning the war inside us. So I'll summarize what I discussed today. The top topic was the war within, what it is and how to win it. So I talked about three main things. The story, I talked about my own dealing with the polio and how others have resentment. Fortunately, I do not have. And also talked about my experience with social work. That we want, in our life's journey, we want doors to be opened. But in our life journey, there are also trap doors that need to be closed. So these trap doors are associated with emotions and the wound that they create desires and the cravings that they create. So inner war means we close this and then we open the doors here. So so I talked about the insights. Why are these doors there inside us? I talk about the three-level model of the self, whether the soul, mind and body. And inside the mind, there are multiple impressions. Some are positive impressions, which help us to go towards healthier responses. And there are some which are negative impressions, which lead us towards negative responses. So depending on which particular window is opened inside us. If the healthier window is opened, then our response will be healthier. But if the other window is opened, then that's what will happen, is that we will go towards an unhealthy response. So we don't want that, and these that open, they open because of these impressions that are there. There are two factors, there's the perception from outside and there is the impression from inside. Both of these combine to open the windows get opened over here. So the inner war is learning which windows are being opened and which windows should be opened. So we talked about three principles in terms of practicals. How do we deal with this? that AIR. What does A, anyone remembers? Awareness. So awareness is about, first is what impressions are getting activated inside me, and while that is a little difficult, you can start to be aware of what perceptions am I taking in from outside. So I talked about, we can think of our thoughts and emotions, that better, but if we can't, we can notice our certain physical tics. My fists get clenched, my brows gets furrowed, whatever. And then I was intelligence. Intelligence is where that window that is being opened, the mind's claims, we evaluate them by comparing them with our facts. Is this really true? And a grounding in reality, especially studying with wisdom texts, can help us to do that. And R was reformation. So reformation refers to especially reforming the impressions inside us. And spiritual practices such as mantra chanting can help us to create better impressions, so that what will happen is it will be easier for us to have healthier responses. And that's how the inner war can be won. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for the talk from you. I had a question. What small daily practices can we do to help reform those impressions? Small daily practices.
Okay. So what small daily practices can we have to reform our mind, the impressions inside us? The specifics can vary based on our particular wounds and needs. But broadly, the idea is that we want to essentially have our mind prompting us towards healthier responses rather than unhealthy responses. So the practices, they can be both individual and they can be universal. So that means that there are some practices that work for everyone for an overall recreating of new impressions in the mind. And there are certain practices that can work for particular individuals for the particular issues that they are dealing with. So in general, the universal practices that are there, they can begin with deep breathing, breath work as we call it. See, what breathing does is becoming aware of our breathing. It brings us back to the present. Because when the pop-up comes up, the pop-up generally is associated with either the past or the future. Oh, this person did like this, and then this is what's going to happen to me, like this again. So if we can just bring ourselves back to the present, that helps a lot in ensuring that those pop-ups, even when they come up, they don't take us over. So breath work helps. Then mantra chanting, what it does is, it helps us connect not just with our own breath, but it also helps us to connect with a divine reality beyond ourselves. Life is always filled with ups and downs. And sometimes when our emotions go wild, then we go way up and way down. Or sometimes we might just keep going down and down and down only. So some people are like manic depressive, and good things happen, they have incredible energy. Bad things happen, they just can't get out of their bed only. But some people are chronic depressive. When bad things happen, they feel terrible. When good things happen, they think now a good thing has happened, now some bad thing is going to happen now. And they're fearful about what bad thing is going to happen. So either way, life's ups and downs is like a wave. We can, the waves will come and we will get tossed up and down by the waves. But say if we are on these waves and if we can get an anchor that we can hold on to, then at holding on to the anchor can prevent us from being tossed by the waves. So mantra chanting is like that anchor. That breathing connects us with ourselves better. Mantras connect us with a divine reality beyond ourselves. and both of those can help us at a generic level. Now at an individual level, generic not in a sense, not in an important sense, but in universal sense, that can work for in general for healing and strengthening ourselves. Now in terms of individual practices, I would say affirmations can help. We can, I talk about the intelligence, so based on our particular needs, if we read some wisdom texts, we hear some talks, if we feel insecurity, if we feel jealousy, if we feel craving, if we feel anxiety, so we read something about it, we hear something about it, whatever quotes or thoughts inspire us, we note them down with us. The specific affirmations that help us, that can be very helpful for us. And then individually journaling can also be very helpful. So affirmations is more for dealing with the negative pop-ups that come up. We try to, okay, the mind is giving me a negative pop-up, but I have another thing which I can pop up consciously. So like I talk about perceptions and impressions. By the impressions, a negative pop-up is coming up. But if I read an affirmation, there's a positive pop-up I can bring. I can bring a perception which can be popped up. That's one thing. Journaling is more for understanding our own patterns. Like, okay, when sometimes I just feel depressed. Okay, when exactly do I feel depressed? What happens before that? Is it when somebody speaks like this to me, or when this happens? So we try to understand some patterns in our own behavior. So which perception triggers it? What impression is triggered by it? What impression gets activated inside it? So it's almost like we become a personal scientist. Like we treat our own life like a science experiment and we observe ourselves. So that will provide us resources to deal with our individual wounds. Okay.
So this entire idea which you're explaining, it presupposes that there is a non-material entity which we've labeled as the mind that exists outside the physical body. Is there any proof that this subtle entity known as the mind exists?
Okay. So is there any proof that the mind exists? There has to be two things. First, what do we really mean by the word proof? We could ask that question, but I'll not go into the philosophical aspect of it right now. What constitutes a proof? But broadly speaking, there is, within the field of neuroscience right now, there are two schools of thought. One is that consciousness and all the conscious experiences, they are reducible to brain phenomena. And that was the mainstream for quite some time in the past several decades. But slowly the alternative view is also gaining ground. And the alternative view is that the brain is an important part of who we are, but it doesn't define us completely. So I'll talk about three, I won't call them as proofs, but they are pointers. They are evidences, and it is up to each individual to decide whether the evidence is strong enough to be considered a proof. So the first is, if we consider twins, if we consider identical twins, that they are genetically not just similar, but they are entirely identical. So when they are identical, why would their personalities be different? They're genetically 100% match, and yet one is an introvert, the other is an extrovert. So why? I traveled across the world and I met dozens of people like that, talk with them, and it's so different. So if we are just completely defined by our biology, why would there be differences? That's the first thing. And the second thing is that there's the mystery of consciousness, especially in terms of how experience occurs. There are many prominent scientists like Wilder Penfield is there, and there are a few others. So I was in Canada and I was giving a talk on neuroscience there, neuroscience and spirituality. So there's a prominent neurosurgeon, Nobel laureate. He's considered the father of neurosurgery, especially in Canada. So he wrote this book called The Mystery of the Mind. And he talked about this principle that he wanted to do some experiments to figure out which areas of the brain are associated with which phenomena. So now we broadly know that. So if you activate a particular part of the brain, then a particular physical function happens. So he had a subject. He told him, okay, raise your hand. He raised his hand and he found that a particular part of the brain is activated. Then he told him lower your hand, and that part of the brain got deactivated. So then he said he activated that part of the brain externally through electrode and probes, and the person's hand went up. He said, okay, what happened? He said, my hand went up. Did you raise your hand? He said, no, I didn't. You raised my hand. Okay, then he deactivated that part of the brain and his hand fell down. He said, what happened? He said, my hand fell down. Did you lower your hand? No, he said, I didn't, you did. So then Penfield repeated the same experiment while basically trying to activate other parts of the brain. His question was, which part of the brain, when activated, will give the person the feeling that I am, the sense of agency, that I am raising my hand or I am lowering my hand. Now, whichever part of the brain was activated, that the subject, that did not give the sense, the subject that sense that I am the doer. That he or she might remember some childhood conversations and the smell of some flower they had smelled 20 years ago, or some food that they had eaten once in their childhood, whatever. Various things would be stimulated, but the sense of agency and doership never came up. So to understand the implication of this, say if I have a computer and I have a printer next to it, and on my computer I press the print button, then the printer hand will start moving over here. So now in the second case, say if I have a computer, I can press the print button, or you can come and press the print button on my computer. Either case, the printer hand will start moving. So in the second case, it was Dr. Penfield was pressing the print button, was activating the brain, and the hand was going up and down. In the first case, in the second case, the subject was saying, I am not raising, you are raising the hand. So in the first case, who was pressing the print button? So his conclusion was that the brain is like a computer, but it is programmed by something beyond itself. That is, so the source of consciousness is extracerebral. Now beyond that, the third thing is what is called as OBEs, out-of-body experiences. There are a significant number of cases of people, I have written a book on reincarnation, demystifying reincarnation. So where somebody is bedridden and unconscious, and they perceive themselves from a perspective about themselves. Now these could be hallucinations, but even hallucinations require the brain to have some level of activity. But there are some cases of OBEs that occur when, for example, there is Dr. Spendler is a prominent neurosurgeon. He created if somebody has got brain aneurysm deep at the bottom of the brain, then to do a surgery, you have to externally stop the brain from functioning. So they got to give a heart attack to a cardiac arrest they cause externally, and then they stop the brain flow, blood flow to the brain. Then actually they open the cranial cavity, they drain out all the blood from the brain, and then they lift out the brain as much as you can lift out, and then they get to the bottom of the brain and they remove the aneurysm. So basically at this point, for all this to be done, the person has to be fully unconscious. So and then they have many sensors attached to the brain by which they make sure that the person is completely unconscious. So there have been cases of out-of-body experiences reported when the brain waves were completely stopped and all the brain sensors were zero. So technically this is called as operation standstill. That means the person technically, their heart is not working, their brain is not working, it's as if they are dead. So how can somebody be conscious when they are not conscious, when their brain is not functioning? So these three things are strong pointers that there is a reality beyond the brain that plays a significant role in the generation of consciousness and the experiences that we have based on consciousness. Okay, thank you.
I have one question.
Yes, please.
So with like managing our emotions, sometimes it's easy to suppress our emotions. So how do we kind of balance tolerating situations or people and not suppressing our emotions at the same time?
Yeah. So, how do we balance tolerating people and not suppressing our emotions? Yeah, I consciously did not use the word controlling the mind or controlling the emotions so much. While it's important, but when we talk about emotions, it's more about emotion management than control. And I'd say there are two extremes. One is we can repress the emotions or we can suppress them. The difference is repress means we are aware but we don't express them. Suppress means they get so buried inside that we are ourselves not aware of it. But they are deep inside there. Now the other is we just express them. So for example, anger, if I repress it, it will burn me from inside. If I express it, it will burn the other person. So in between the two is we need to process it. So process means that, say if we're just going along the road and somebody just cuts across and we feel irritated. That's a casual thing. There's no need to go about doing a lot of inner work about it. But if we are interacting with somebody regularly or we are facing a similar situation regularly, and at that time we face some challenges. So it's vital that we learn to process at that time. So what I talked about, the practices, awareness and intelligence, followed by some kind of reformation. That can help us in processing the emotions. So processing essentially means that, see, emotions themselves can be like a black box. We don't really know exactly what comes over us when an emotion takes control of us. But what we can know is what comes before the emotion and what comes after the emotion. So if we can understand what comes before the emotion, we can create some barriers. So for example, if we know that some boundaries, some barriers we can create, if we know that some particular person brings out the worst within us, then if we are going to have a high stakes discussion with them, maybe don't have it in alone, maybe don't have it in private place. If we have it in public place, we have somebody there with us, then that person will help us to keep a handle. So we try to create some barriers so that we don't expose ourselves too much to those things. If somebody is an alcoholic and trying to recover, maybe they shouldn't go to a party which is in a bar. So we create barriers to perception. Second is we create barriers or boundaries to expression. That means that even if I get angry, and as I said, if I am surrounded with other people, I may be very angry with the other person, but just being present among other people, that will ensure that I don't go too far. So it could also mean that we don't keep too much idle time for ourselves. We have some structure for our life. If somebody has hurt us terribly, and if we don't have anything planned, then we might just go into revenge fantasy or a pity party for hours and hours. But if we have some tangible things to do, then we won't wallow in that emotion for too long. So before we can process that emotion in terms of going inside it, we need to go outside it and see that it doesn't come too forcefully inside us or it doesn't make us overreact too much. And then once we have done that, then we can go deeper and look at, okay, when that emotion comes up, what exactly am I feeling? And what is the thinking going on at that time? See, even though under the control of emotions, we may act unreasonably, but the mind gives some reasoning. The reasoning may be defective, but still there is a reasoning. So understanding that reasoning. So like if there's a loss and I start thinking, the window opens up, you are a loser. So why does that window open up? What is the chain over there? So that chain, if we understand a little bit more, that will require, as I said, journaling, a little bit inner work. Once we understand that, then we'll be able to process the emotion. And once we have processed the emotion, then we will not be so vulnerable to similarly being provoked in future. Okay, thank you.